it's bigger. It's bigger than just information overload, isn't it? We're bombarding our learners not only with the volume. Sorry, something's. Sorry, I'm trying to move on to the next slide and it's not liking it. There we go. So yeah, it's not just information overload, it's information overload plus unfamiliar vocabulary every single lesson. No wonder they feel overwhelmed. No wonder they switch off. So what did we decide to do differently as part of our project? Well, first of all, we decided that we'd stop telling our learners to use sophisticated vocabulary. We asked the question. They don't know what that means. And it's such an elusive, vague term, isn't it? And it's all relative. What's sophisticated to somebody isn't sophisticated to somebody else. And then we stopped asking learners to record new words and meanings in their glossaries at the back of their exercise books. They don't look at them. And unless the words are being used constantly in speech, writing, reading, at best, they'll remain in learners' passive vocabularies. So we wanted to slow everything right down. And to do this, we decided that we'd present our learners with a very short list of words, which could be used in many different contexts in both creative and transactional writing. And we wanted to move away from bombarding our learners with different words, different texts. We wanted to bombard our learners instead with this finite list of words. We wanted to speak them, read them, write them, and only when these words were being used confidently would we decide it was time to move on. So compiling the word list took a long time. And how did we do this? We trawled past papers, exemplar responses. We looked at examiners' notations relating to sophisticated vocabulary. And we ended up with about 100 words, which we then reduced, refined, until we arrived at a final 10. And we had very clear ideas about how we didn't want any resource that we produced as part of the project to look. We didn't want it to have an educational feel. So we decided on a bookmark, portable, colourful, discreet, and really importantly, not like a traditional spelling list or vocabulary list. So it wasn't something that screamed school, college, or I'm having to work on my vocabulary. And all learners were given this bookmark. And then we drip fed these words into starter activities at the beginning of each lesson. So there's just an example of something that we did there. So a word activity, kind of word matching activity. We tweaked extracts to include the words whenever we could. So we did some editing of text so that learners would be reading these words. And basically we sprinkled these words wherever we could. So has it worked? Well, kind of quietly and tentatively, I'll say yes, it has, because I have been able to award grade 4, grade 5 grades to learners in the pilot group who I don't believe would have achieved otherwise. The learners have used the words in their own writing. We have evidence of that. We've seen a real increase in the length of learners' written responses. And crucially, in my experience, they have met that AO5 and AO6 criteria for vocabulary, which means that they've gone up a level. But I think what I really like is the beautiful qualitative findings that have come from this project. I'm not really a data person, but what I really love are the fact that the learners have spoken positively about what we've been doing and they found it helpful. And they've reported feeling more confident, and they've reported that they felt able to experiment with the vocabulary. And I'm just going to end the presentation really on just some really heartwarming and beautiful comments from learners, and ask you to just read these. And then if there is time, then obviously kind of questions. If not, then the research findings will be published as part of the OTLA report. And obviously we're happy to talk to anybody about what we've done and share resources with anybody who's interested. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Anne. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I think that's really valuable stuff, vocabulary, and I'm definitely going to follow up with you more about not teaching, you know, to that term sophisticated vocabulary, because I hear that thrown around in classrooms because straight off the you know, the AOs and stuff. So that's brilliant. Thank you. And what we'll do, if there's any questions for Anne, if you pop them in the chat, then Anne can reply, just so we can make sure everybody gets their break in. We're going to move across now to our next speaker, Piers. Piers, are you with us? I think I've let you in.
I'm here, yeah.
Hi, Piers. Are you able to share your screen if you have that ability?
Yeah, I've got a couple of little bits and pieces. I'll probably just sort of talk for a few minutes first, and then I just had a couple of different bits from different PowerPoints that I wanted to share with everyone.
Sure, it's over to you, Piers. If you want to introduce yourself, I'm sure people would love to know what you do and who you are, and a bit about yourself.
Cool, yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, hi, so yeah, my name's Piers Alexander. I'm the program leader, so course director for GCSE English at West Suffolk College. And what I'm essentially going to talk to you about today, which was a little bit tricky in some ways to kind of narrow down, because it's really part of a big sort of broad project as such. I can't really say project because it's just very much part of the everyday way of working for me, but let's call it that. So it's part of a big broad project that I'm working with my GCSE English Resit students. And that's kind of about the creation of ideas. So the creating of ideas, the creating of concepts. So yeah, so that's what I'm going to talk to you guys about today. I'm going to narrow it down into a few different stages. So one of them, I'm going to speak to you about some stuff that I've been doing with my students on the creating of ideas for paper 2, question 5. And within that, I'm going to link that to how it came out of really something that was a much smaller task that was part of a bigger lesson about analysis, but it was about creating context from within a very, very short extract. And generally speaking, this all comes as part of the work that I've been doing with my students and, you know, the department that's been doing on analysis. Because for me, one of the things, and by the way, I would just like to say thank you to Anne there. That was really very interesting about the vocabulary stuff. But one of the big sort of following on from that is one of the big things that I find my students really, really have, let's say, quite a tricky time in sort of wrestling with and dealing with is analysis. Now, my experience with Resit students over the years has been that, broadly speaking, I can say that lots of them have a certain set of skills that they, you know, they come in with and they're really pretty good at, or we can sharpen them up on really fairly quickly. So let's say that we're looking at this from the starting point of, we know our students know, you know, they can pick out language techniques in a text. They know their P paragraph or whatever variation on that people might be doing. They can put all of those things together. They can choose reasonably good quotes in a given text or excerpt. And And then when it comes to the analysis, to the real extended analysis, they invariably seem all to kind of grind to a halt, you know? So we've been trying to do a lot of work with that, and the connection between section A and section B. So the connection between their own reading and thinking about a text, and then their creation of concepts when they come to writing question 5 in paper 1, question 5 in paper 2. For me, again, as I say, this is sort of part of a whole load of bigger things. So I'm going to try and keep it sort of narrow, but contextually sort of understandable enough, you know, without sort of missing big pieces. But for me, it's part of, again, a much bigger thing about bridging a lot of the gaps between sections in that stuff. Excuse me, sorry, my hay fever is absolute nightmare today, so I'm really apologise if I'm sort of like ever so slightly sort of sniffy on here. Okay, yeah, so so the paper 2, question 5, what it came out of, and I think I'll share my screen now here, was, sorry, let me attempt to do this. Okay, here we go. So, okay, here we go. Yeah. So this was a question 5 that I did back in February, question 5 lesson back in February with my students. So as you can see, yeah, question 5, expanding ideas and crafting responses. And what I had them do, to keep it short, was we had an example here. I don't know if you guys can all see that well enough. I've got the kind of like something over it on my screen, but so we've got a quote here at the top. We used a number of quotes in this lesson and the following lessons. Some of them were quotes that we came up with ourselves. Others were, you know, statements, quotes that we found in different places that we wanted to use. Some of them were ones that students came up with, but in order for the students to come up with them, we needed the students to be really familiar with the sort of statement they would have to be dealing with for paper 2, question 5. So this particular one that we've got here, if I can just highlight that there. So yeah, this particular one we have here, that's an old quote from, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with, there's a website that's been knocking around for years, since like the early mid 2000s, I think, called The Political Compass. It's like this just old, like, you know, internet sort of like one of those things where you answer a bunch of multiple choice questions, or you respond to statements, let's say, and then it, you know, tells you some sort of like, puts you on some sort of grid at the end. But I chose one of the statements from there. So we have this statement here. So it's a sad reflection. Again, I'm just trying to move this little bit of the screen. Oh, yeah, there you go. It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. So what we started with here was, I was thinking, okay, if I gave that to my students and I said, oh, there you go, there's paper 2, question 5. So use your language techniques, use this, use that, do all your structure stuff that you know about and write a response. The students would have mainly come up with reasonably limited responses that weren't, you know, they might have gone into some good areas somewhere, but it would have been probably quite inconsistent for the most part, you know, etc., etc. So I wanted them to do a number of different things with this. I wanted them to really keep up some consistency in their writing. I wanted them to structurally have a nice flow with a really effective structure in it, but not just get bogged down with that and spend forever planning it. So, okay, so what I said to them was divide it up. First of all, divide it into 3 statements. So these statements depend obviously on the reader, on the perspective and things like that. And that was nice because we linked that into perspectives and conveyance and other things. But there were some examples at the bottom. So, okay, water is now a branded consumer product. This shows something about our society. This something is not very good. It's a sad thing, you know, according to the statement. Okay, so straight away the students have divided that up, and for all of them it was something that it made them read the statement a lot more closely, and immediately they all started thinking about it in a slightly more ordered fashion, but not ordered in a very constrained way. It still allowed them a lot of space for their own thoughts and their own ideas. So what we did with this then was, in the lesson, I'm going to just flick through these slides quite quickly, but we looked at each of these and we broke it down into, basically had, we discussed these things. This lesson was obviously delivered because it was 22nd of February. We can see at the top there. This was during lockdown, so this was a completely online lesson. It was planned for students who were we were teaching it live online, but also for people to be able to access it, not having any live teaching at all. So they were supposed to be able to go to this and sort of read through it and be able to make sense of it and that. So we broke this down, we discussed it, or in this case, there were things and prompts for those students who couldn't attend. They could read these things and think about these things and make notes for themselves. Once we'd broken those things down, what we then did, and I think I might need to go to my next PowerPoint for that. So what we then did was we started to create some concept questions for each of these. So I'm going to move over to this one here. Yeah, so with the concept questions for each of the statements, the students were to write The students were to write 2 or 3 questions for each. In the end, we kept it to 2, and this was something that developed as we taught it. And I was working, I was working with a PGCE student all through the year, and we got a lot of good ideas coming out of this. This was something that developed as we went. So essentially, what this has become is the student gets their question 5 statement. They break it down into 3 smaller statements, 3 sort of constitutive parts, and then for each of those, they ask 2 questions. And what a lot of the students have started to do is to use those 2 questions as either sort of smaller paragraph headings, or they've blended them in as rhetorical questions that begin each paragraph, something like that. And I can give you an example of the questions on the next slide. So on this slide, we can see the concept questions. At the top, we've got a statement, question 5 statement from a previous exam. So here we've got parents today are overprotective. They should let their children take part in adventurous, even risky activities to prepare them for later life. So with these statements, again, just to reiterate slightly, I found that a lot of my students, by the time they've read to the end of the statement, it's a fairly dull statement, and they're kind of like, all right, well, what's at the beginning? And it's really tricky sometimes for them to organize their ideas. So we got them to break it down.
Sorry, Piers, we can only see the PowerPoint.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
No worries. Let me try and change my screen again then. Sorry, it won't be a sec. Hold up. Let's have a look. Okay, we got that one now, yeah? Where it says concept questions at the top?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, so here we go. Again, it's with the statement. So parents today are overprotective. They should let their children take part in adventurous, even risky activities to prepare them for later life. Again, as I say, like long statement, students are kind of half switched off by the time they've read to the end of it. Difficult to organize their ideas, and they start to answer this in their writing in a very immediate sense. So they kind of use all of their ideas in the first paragraph or 2, and then after 2 paragraphs, they're like, I don't know what else to write. This is all of the things that this was an attempt to deal with. So here we have a number of different concept questions for each of these. So, okay, why are parents overprotective? Again, according to the statement. What are they trying to protect children from? Is this legitimate? Is it a false worry? And then the second part of the statement, why are adventurous or risky activities good? How do they prepare children for later life? How are these activities connected to parents' concerns, etc., etc. So what we did, again, just to go back to it, so what this became was the process that my students now go through with paper 2, question 5, is that they read the statement, they break the statement down into 3 parts, and for each of the 3 parts, they come up with 2 concept questions. And then they use these 6 concept questions essentially for a paragraph each, So their first paragraph, okay, let's take this example that's literally on the screen now. So yeah, there's 7 on there, but as I say, this was an earlier version. So they, the first paragraph could start with a mini heading or the rhetorical question, why are parents overprotective? And then this leads them straight into their writing without them having to kind of think too much about it, if you know what I mean. I don't mean that in a negative sense at all. But what I mean is that I find that when they think too much about their writing, they kind of focus in on one point, or they feel like they use all their ideas immediately. And it was a way of giving them a piece of constrained writing, in a sense that it was structured and scaffolded, except the constraint and the structure and the scaffold is their own. They've created it themselves. Now, this obviously took a fair bit of practice, and we did this over a few lessons, and it's now absolutely a part of the way that we, I say we, yeah, I, me, some of the other people in the department, but it's the way that question 5 is currently, you know, being taught, and the way that we're going into the next academic year with it. And this referred to as well, if I can go to an earlier part in this very slide, this stuff here, which was something that AQA themselves stated in, where did I find it? It was in some YouTube video, some AQA YouTube video, but again, it was boiled down into very sort of student-friendly language. And this process was part of an attempt to deal with what AQA wants, but in a very, 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 very student-friendly, boiled down way that allows students to create their own ideas, to structure their own work, and to expand their ideas, but to keep them in a very ordered fashion that's free enough to allow them to write, but constrained enough to keep a structure. So yeah, the 3 points on there, AQA state that students must demonstrate the following: they must use appropriate form and register, they must sustain their argument, they must consider an inventive structure for their argument. And the way that I sold this way of working to a lot of my students was, if you do the statement breakdown and you do the concept questions, you've automatically got 6 paragraphs. If you run out of ideas for one paragraph, you simply wrap that paragraph up and move on to the next paragraph. And through this, I just, you know, I doubled or trebled the amount of writing that I was getting from students for a start. And the quality of it really, really improved without very much sort of struggle, so to speak. And the more practice they got at it, the more easily they were able then to allow their ideas to flow more, to include all of the other things that we've of course been working on, their language techniques for paper 2, etc., etc. I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Actually, I was going to sort of talk a little bit about the teaching of context from within individual statements and stuff like that, but I don't want to go over time too much. So yeah, Holly, if that's all right, I'll just wrap it up there.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thanks, Piers.
Sure.
If there are any questions for Piers in the chat, I know there's been some chat going on. I think Mel's put some stuff in there, Laura and Josh. Brian has just asked, could you go back to the previous slide, please? Just so she can take a photo. What we'll do is we'll ask everybody at the end if they're willing to share their resources, and we're going to put all the willing resources onto a PowerPoint, onto a Padlet or Wakelet, and we'll get them shared from the speaker conversations as well. So awesome. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Piers.
Thank you.
Round of applause for Piers. Lots of work going on where Piers is on this. Seen it in meetings that Bob Reed has been running in the Eastern region. And I know that Juliet's also been doing some stuff surrounding it as well. So it's been brilliant. Thank you. So I'm going to pass over to our last speaker now. I know Matt's in here. Hi, Matt. Matt, I'll leave you the time to introduce yourself and let people know what you're here to talk about. But it's really exciting to have you here. And again, if there's any questions as we go along, if people want to pop them into the chat, we can always pick up on them later. And then we'll go from there. Thank you very much. Over to you, Matt.
Cheers, Holly. Morning, everyone. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear. If I'm not, then let me know. I'm going to race through loads of different stuff actually this morning, so you're going to have to try and keep up. I'm ambitiously going to share my screen and show you loads of different things at the same time. Fingers crossed it actually works. What I would first say is hello. Thanks to Hollie and everyone at Touch Consulting for involving me here. And it's lovely to see you. My name's Matt Gordon. I'm from Waltham Forest College in northeast London, and I teach GCSE English, AQA spec that Piers has just been talking about, and English functional skills. Thanks, Liz and Piers, and hopefully thanks for paying it forward, if you like, to workshop this afternoon is talking about sort of cultural context and stuff like that. Some of the things I'm going to talk about, well, cut a long story short, what I'm going to do is share some resources and some ideas about this idea of context and modern slavery. And to give credit where credit's due, I did a ETF level 5 developing a practice kind of program a little while ago, and we were asked as part of that to plan and develop some resources with another practitioner that we can use in a GCSE Resit class. And I thought, with this other practitioner, I thought, okay, obviously that's the sort of thing we do all the time, not a problem. And I thought, rather than doing it for the sake of it, if you like, to tick a criteria box for an accreditation, I'd do something, or we would do something that we can actually use and would actually use it in the classes. So that's what we've come up with. And it goes back several months now, but what I've done is use these resources in a variety of classes. I tried it out on my GCSE adults, because they usually were the guinea pigs on new stuff, see how it worked there. Then I used it in a couple of 16 to 18 GCSE classes, and also used them in slightly different ways, of course, for a functional skills level 1, level 2 mixed class. So what it's all about is it kind of linked in actually to some of the stuff that Piers was talking about for question 5. If you don't know the AQA spec, Piers has given us an overview. For paper 2, the students are asked to write a non-fiction piece, for example, a newspaper article or letter or something like that. And it's related to the theme, or themes rather, that they study for 2 texts based on non-fiction. And one of those texts is a 19th century text. Obviously, if you don't know, I'm sure you do, functional skills, but this is quite above and beyond really what they're going to be asked to produce for functional skills writing. But I found with one particular group, actually 2 groups of mine, there's a mixture between level 1 and level 2, but the level 1s I was lucky enough to have were actually quite high performing. And I thought, okay, let me try these set of resources out on them. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully it won't be anything too embarrassing that comes up. And what I'm going to do is sort of walk and talk you through it pretty quickly. What I would say, please don't be shy. If you can't hear me for some reason, or you can't hear, or you can't see what's happening on the screen, give me a shout, unmute your mic, because I'm not going to have a look at the chat box. There's too much going on. In fact, let me close that while I'm doing this. So please just unmute your mic and give me a shout, and I'll fix it. So I'm going to share screen. Give me 2 secs. Okay, so first thing I'm going to show you is a couple of images. This is how I started off. I'm going to refer everything to the GCSE 16 to 18 session we did, and I'll just mention a few things in terms of how it was changed for functional skills. Let me just fiddle about with this. So sorry, there we go. So use Mentimeter, and the idea was originally for this was during lockdown, so it was online sessions. So obviously we're using a fair bit of digital tools. If you don't know Mentimeter already, I highly recommend having a go. It's all free. You can get an upgraded package as well. You get all sorts of bells and whistles to use, but essentially the basic package pretty good. It's great for quick feedback, interactive use in online sessions, and actually I've used it in face-to-face sessions as well. Students quite like the anonymity to it and things like that. So the first thing was to get them thinking about the overall context. Now, remember what I mentioned earlier with slavery, and we're thinking about historical slavery, if you like, but also modern slavery. As I mentioned before, for GCSE paper 2 AQA, they're always looking at 2 texts, one from the Victorian period and one either taken from 20th or 21st century. And then they do a couple of questions. Question 2, which is summary or synthesis through a particular focus. And question 4 is a comparison of those texts, usually through writers' attitudes or opinions, stuff. And they're asked to explore those attitudes and perspectives through the, apologies for that motorbike, through the use of writing methods, language structure, that stuff. So first thing is a bit of a warmer activity. What's your first thoughts and feelings when seeing these images? I should
I didn't do stretching last night.
Sorry, if that was a question, come in or a point, please do come in again. What I should have said before I showed you this is some of it is a little bit disturbing, shall we say. I should have started off with the BBC warning, you know, if any of these sort of things affect you or you find difficult, then please number, because we are talking about slavery after all, can be quite an uncomfortable subject. But anyway, what the students were given was, that's the first image. So what's your first thoughts and feelings on seeing that? It's a real image, by the way. There's the second one, again, a real image, and that gentleman, which I'm sure you will recognise. And then they were directed to go to menti.com, put in that code, and share some ideas. Then we had a bit more of a thinking without pictures kind of question. Again, these were using Mentimeters. What do human rights mean to you? That was in reference to previous sessions we did with all classes talking about human rights in general. Brexit and all sorts of other stuff came up. And again, menti.com put in the code and put in some words or some short phrases. And this was using the word cloud system on Mentimeter. So they put in a word or several words. I'll give them 3 choices. They could refresh it and do it again. And it builds, if you don't know Mentimeter, it builds a word cloud live, so you can share that so people can see it as well. And if I'm right on this, tell me please somebody if I'm wrong, but if the same idea or same word or words come up, they tend to get bigger. So if somebody puts in I don't know, they puts in Brexit, for example, or lack of human rights or something like that, or racism, let's say, then that word will get bigger and bigger in the center. So it kind of, you know, it's reactive in that sense. And then the last one was, what do you think of when you hear the phrase Black Lives Matter? So again, we're thinking about context here, wider context. We are thinking about question 5, as I said, but also thinking about overall historical and cultural context, a bit of, what can we say, what's the word, trying to reduce, if you like, this cultural deficit and link it into modern concerns and themes. This was using a slightly different thing on Mentimeter, which was the scrolling text boxes or something to get some answers there. Again, anonymous, and it's and you can share it, and then people saying. So sometimes they're inspired by others, saying, and it's all anonymous. That was the sort of warmer activity, if you like. We did it a lot quicker, of course, than I'm showing you here. I just want to briefly show you some of the replies. So, of course, again, I find it really useful. Mentimeter, as part of the freebie one, you can save this, you can download it, and then you can post it in, you know, in the, we use Microsoft Teams, for example. We can post it in the class team and share it out. Refer to or come back to it. A few misspellings there, so this is a genuine one you can see. Slavery came up as number 1. Of course, they all recognised Martin Luther King Jr. as well. And then you've got the other one. This was the scrolling text boxes I was talking about. What do you think of when you hear the phrase Black Lives Matter? I don't know if you can see that. I've just got a notification while saying my screen sharing is paused. I'm going to have to go to chat because I can see.
We can just see your presentation at the minute, Matt.
All right. Let me share that again. Apologies, everyone. Let me just find that. So sorry. There we go. Sorry, that's the one I was trying to show you. So you should be looking at now is the first one, the word cloud. What's your first thoughts and feelings when seeing these images? Those pictures, and you can see this is a real one. You can see hatred misspelled, for example, and slavery. Martin Luther King came up naturally. This is the scrolling text boxes, and again you can see some genuine responses to it. So it's really to get thinking, of course, get the responses from those pictures. This slightly loaded question, if you like. Phrase of Black Lives Matter, thinking about wider context, what might be relevant to them. I'm in Northeast London, so and the vast majority of our students are coming from a variety of different backgrounds. Some, of course, Afro-Caribbean, but from all over. So they had a lot to say about this, not just the adults. And so on. So let me get rid of that for you. So that we had a bit of discussion on these things. We went over some of these ideas. We referred it back to previous sessions. And then from there, we started to have a look at the actual texts. bouncing off some of these idea. Yes, it does. I've just seen that question coming in for Josh. It does have admin and content control features. Absolutely. Even with the basic, the freebie one, you can filter out and you can select languages, potential adjectives, rude words, that kind of stuff. And I think you can sort of program it to recognize other stuff as well. However, if you upgrade, I think you've got a lot more control over what's happening at the same time. So I use a freebie one, but I would recommend, I think, from what I've seen, trying to get the paid version even better. So yeah, so we got those ideas. Then we moved on. Let me share my screen again for you. Like I said, we use Microsoft's Teams. So you do have, I think, similar sort of tools you can use in Google Meet and that kind of stuff. And of course, you can use polls and stuff in Zoom as well. But I'll show you the ones we use. This was a very short, again, a bit of a warmer, really, or bouncing off from those pictures to do this. For the functional skills one, I changed it slightly because it became part of a research thing as well. But essentially, this was just a bit of a quiz for the GCSE lot. This is one from the 20th of May. Again, this is the real one. And with forms, which I like very much, you can set it so it's anonymous if you want, or you can set it so you can see who's saying what. I can't click on the names or do that, but you can track it in that way as anonymous or as named. This one, as you can see at the top, has got 4 points, so it's self-marking. So students get to know at the end, once they've submitted, what's the actual correct question, whether they got it correct, and you can also do a little bit of feedback again, or go back to something. And what I did with this one was embed a video about 2 or 3 minutes long. I'll just quickly press play for you. About 2 minutes long. And you don't need to hear it, by the way, because it's just music. But they can bring up some subtitles and stuff if they've got it in there. So it's facts about, obviously, modern slavery. And then they get the quiz questions directly taken from the video. And then one which is something, furthering, extending their thinking about a little bit about this stuff, a telltale sign, which isn't mentioned in the video, that might show somebody who's being held against their will. So it's a bit of a quiz. I found a lot of students of all ages really like to do a bit of a quiz. They know that if you tell them whether they've got the right or wrong answers, and you can also share. If I can just sneak click on responses, so you obviously can't see my individual student names, but if I go to review answers, I can, and then you can see as a group, for example, that most people got that one right, that one too, that one everyone got right, and then you've got different responses here. So it's a really useful way of tracking it. It's quite a relatively fun way to get some information to them, get interactive on it as well. So that was a quiz we used. And then if I stop the share, I'm going to show you one more thing very quickly. The next step then was, again, I'm talking about the GCSE lot mainly, was to then look at the video. So if I go back to sharing my screen, I'm going to show you the text now. The original text, actually, let me show my screen. The original text we used for this was this one. You may be aware of it, or if you are not, then I highly recommend it, because you can use it mainly for GCSE, probably not really skills, but it's a 19th century text, 1865. And what it is, this gentleman, Jordan Anderson, was a former slave working on this Colonel Anderson's plantation. And once the Emancipation Act, of course, was enacted, he obviously left that, found paid work, and moved out. This letter is a reply written by the former slave, Jordan Anderson, to his old master, his slave master, don't forget, in reply to a request from his slave master to come back and work for him. And it's a great piece of writing to look at in any GCSE class, I think, especially for tone. I won't spoil it for you. I'll let you read it through. Obviously, I'm happy to share these resources. You can Google it and find it quite quickly. But obviously, he's not very happy, shall we say, about being asked to come back and work as a slave, even if it is for pay. Thanks very Colonel Anderson. And just to give you an idea of tone, that last sentence he leaves him with, killer sentence on the letter is, say howdy to George Carter and thank him for taking a pistol from you when you were shooting at me. Your old servant, Jordan Anderson. So there's some great stuff to look at there. And you can also do further context in terms of it was actually dictated, for example, not written, and it was published in the American newspaper, so the public response, shall we say, to slavers really, but certainly to Colonel H. Anderson. And then the second text, which is the compare and contrast bit, was taken from modern sources, obviously 21st century, does what it says on the tin. If you can see it there, it's an antislavery.org website, it's an NGO, and it's basically to inform us what's happening in our modern world. Slavery does exist, but of course it's very different from what we might term historical slavery. And some modern text there, very different kind of text. So when it comes to GCSE, you can easily do some general comparison contrasts between them. You can do obviously language features as well, structural techniques. You can also focus, for example, for question 3 on the specific language. Mainly, I'd suggest for the 19th century text is a good one to do that for. And you can base the question 5 on it, because it's what I did with functional skills as well, get them to do a bit of writing. You can set, for example, a task like write a newspaper article about the history of slavery, or write a newspaper on your opinion of slavery, or that kind of thing, or indeed a letter to something like that. You know, you can set all sorts of written tasks based on. Lastly, because I'm looking at the time, forgive me, just want to share one final thing with you. What I also did as a part of the, what do you call it? Getting them thinking about the overall context, getting them doing some of their own research. So you can set it as a web quest, a little mini research. That's what I did for the GCSE lot. For functional skills, I did a slightly different Padlet, just to take some of the information out. But this was a Padlet I created and then adapted with my other colleague, where it's got the original text, for example, there it is, but also divided up into extracts, because it's a relatively long one, relatively complex text. This one I'm talking about, the 19th century one. So you can divide it up into that part, for example, is A, and then this one is B, and get them to work on that individually. And as a bit of background, as a web quest to research thing, we went through the text, went through some basic questions, and then was getting them to think about contexts. So I gave them this Padlet, got them into pairs or threes, and then directed them about 15-20 minutes to find out more information, and then present back some of the information about slavery itself, historical slavery and modern slavery, using all of these materials. And of course, they could also find their own materials online, but here's the starter, most of them straight from here. A few of them did Google some other stuff as well. Great to see. And you've got the original publication letters, you can see there, that's the actual text, real text from New Look Daily Tribune. There's a web article about the actual publication of the letter and the background to it. Nice historical, I think that's from, I can't remember where it's from now, but this is a decent website. If I just click through, show you, there you go, History Channel, on slavery in America. There's a Guardian article about it, and then you've got some videos I've bunged in as well. That current context is the one you saw, and they've seen already, which was the quiz I was showing you earlier, that one. And then you've got the Salvation Army, which is a really good video again at modern slavery, and there's some of the pictures, other pictures that we use as well, and that's where I uploaded, for example. Have a look at it. So basically, to cut long story short, they were given the Padlets as links. They were sent off on a little web quest. Obviously, while it's in class, I found it very good. Even though it was mainly digital, online stuff, I found it really good as a face-to-face, because obviously you can go around and monitor them. So you have a pair of them or 3 of them working on this. I'd tell them to choose 3 different types of resources. So a web site, let's say, one of the texts in the video, or one of the pictures in the video, whatever it happens to be. Some of them found some audio files as well, which was great, some podcasts about slavery, modern and old, and then present back their findings. It was a bit of a history lesson in many ways, and we brought it all the way back to looking at language stuff and the AQA GCSE stuff in terms of comparing those 2 text I was showing you earlier. A slightly watered down version, apologies, I know I'm going over time a tiny bit, but slightly watered down version was this one, Slavery Modern and Old, and that's the one I use for functional skills. Slightly different task for the functional skill guys. What I did, I asked them to, again, choose 3. They worked in pairs or in 3s. 1 or 2 of them work by themselves, fine. And then they use this information to then produce their own article for the college. So they were writing for the college RAG, the student RAG, to inform fellow students about historical context of slavery and also relationship when it comes to Black Lives Matter. And it was actually a very successful, slightly surprisingly successful lesson actually for them to produce that. Really good work for GCSE and the functional skills. And that more or less is that. Just seen some questions. Embedding the video into the form. I think you can do that with Google Classroom and stuff like that, or you can turn it into a sort of poll. Zoom, for example. Find pairs of text for paper 2. Yes, I wouldn't say top tips, but I've got some tips. I tend to, Google it quite openly, based on theme, basically, and then see what comes up. Victorian text. It's an ancient website now, but there is some really useful original source text from the Victorian period from the Victorian web. If you haven't heard about that one, I think they've got some links with NATE, National Association of English as well. It might be worth exploring there. And British Library actually has got loads of stuff specifically for GCSE AQA, and they do. I can't remember if they do it by spec, whether they do it just generally for English language, GCSE English language. But anyway, British Library website is definitely worth a trawl through for original text, because of pictures, if you like, of the original text. Word and move things around, and then they've got links for further study and videos and that kind of stuff. So top tips, I would say Victorian web's quite a good one to look at. British Library website if you don't do that already. Thank you very much. So sorry, Holly, I've gone over time on that. And if there's any quick questions, I'll be quite happy to try and answer them. If you'd like to know more, please drop me a line anytime. I'm going to drop my Holly, forgive me to do this for doing this, but I'm going to drop my email into the.
You plug yourself. It's absolutely fine. Keep doing it. What we're here to do, here to amplify and share and everything else. I encourage people to put their Twitter handles in their names, so you can keep following them and what your colleges are.
That's what I'm doing. So I've put in the general chat box my email address, matthew.gorman@wharton.ac.uk, and also my Twitter handle as well. And Jenny, I've just seen your message.
Fab. Thank you so much, Matt. Round of applause for Matt as well.